Hey y'all, it's Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am coming to you with my mid-year goals check-in. I thought we could go over all of the goals that I set at the start of the year and we could see if I am meeting them, and then we can talk about goals for the second half of the year, of which there aren't many. I literally just watched my goals video so that I could remind myself what my goals were. And I was actually pretty shocked. I have forgotten a large majority of them, I feel. So let's go on and get into it. I think the first thing we should talk about is my actual reading challenge, which is where I set myself a list of books to read this year. And so my goal with that was to read ancient classics. It was to reread them or to read new to me ancient classics. I'll be real with y'all, this is a complete failure. I have read 3, I think, ancient classics. And if you want to know, I think in general, I have maybe read 5 classics in total the whole year. And so this has kind of been a failure. Not necessarily because I did pick up some ancient classics. It at least gave me the push to pick up, I think, 3. But otherwise, I guess I would say it's a failure, especially because going in conjunction with that, my goal was to do like a dedicated review of each individual ancient classic once I finished it, and kind of do like a March of the Penguins style thing. Really, that still could have been achieved with all 3 of these. I did one video. The reason that I never moved forward with that, especially with the other couple that I read, is just that an individual book review like that performs so poorly, really, and they are a lot of work on my end in terms of getting notes together, just getting your thoughts together, organizing the review. And so to me, that was a lot of work for little reward. And so I kind of made the objective decision back when I did that first one that I probably wasn't going to do a dedicated book review like that again. Though interestingly, I really enjoy watching individual book reviews, but they are just not things that have historically ever performed that well on my channel. And so it just seemed like they took a lot out of me for a little gain. So I thought that was fine to cut ties with that. I think going into the second half of the year, I am not going to make it a goal to continue reading ancient classics because this has not been a classics year for me in terms of reading whatsoever. Even last year really wasn't. I got very burned out on classics at the end of 2021. In many ways, that's because I don't have the time to read that I did during the pandemic. And thus, the time that I do have to read now, I would really like it to be with stuff that relaxes me, not something that's requiring more work. And so I think there's a pretty obvious reason why classics have taken a backseat for me, especially this year. But I think it's pretty clear that I shouldn't make it a goal for the second half of the year to read more of them. I think the second half of the year is more stressful anyway, and that there is a lot going on. There are a lot of themed events specifically at the end of the year. And so I always feel like I'm trying to like mood read and get everything done before Booktober specifically. And so I'm just not going to keep this as a goal for the last 6 months. One of my big goals too, which I thought was interesting, and I remember this vaguely, was just that I said in general, all of the goals that I set in that initial video were for this first 6 months. And I think that's really good because you always come out of the gate wanting to achieve your goals, but then they kind of fall off for me, especially by the midway point of the year. And so I think that was a good idea. But looking at the second half of the year, I just don't think it's a good idea to marry myself to that. My biggest goal of the year, aside from that reading list, was just in general to buy less books, because that was a big goal that I had in 2022, and I think I achieved it. So I just kind of rolled it over into this year. I feel fairly good about this. My goal is always never to have more coming in than what is leaving, and I am currently doing some massive unhauls. So I feel pretty good about the level of books that have come in this year. I have my book of the month subscription and I love it, so I'm not getting rid of that. So it does mean that there are at least 1 or 2 books coming in per month, but I don't haul in the way that I used to, and I really didn't last year. So I feel like this is a success because it's kind of moved over into this year, and I'm still just absolutely obsessed with my Kindle. And sometimes I find myself making the decision to pick something up on Kindle rather than getting it physically, especially if it's new. and it's going to be a hardcover. I'm just not a big fan of hardcovers anymore. I really like my Kindle, and so I think a lot of the time when I'm thinking about picking something up, I choose to get it on my Kindle. And so I do feel good about this. I feel like more books have come in this first 6 months than came in the first 6 months of last year. So maybe that is a concern, but I think the second half of the year looks pretty dry for me in terms of anticipated releases. But going hand in hand with that, I wanted to read books as they come in, and that's not been achieved. It hasn't. Let's just go on and admit it. Let's be honest with ourselves. I have let a big, massive stack of TBR books stack up. It's okay. That's fine. I know a lot of booktubers have like a dedicated TBR shelf. I think that was one of my goals too. But I am kind of overwhelmed right now by the stack that I have. I think I'll feel better once they are really on a true TBR shelf. But I have noticed that I have more sitting in that TBR stack than what I have read in terms of things that I have picked up this year. So while I may not be doing many huge book hauls anymore, I still feel like I am not reading new releases quick enough. And really not just new releases, any book that I pick up. I feel like I'm better about that on Kindle, weirdly enough. So this is definitely a goal I want to roll over into the second half of the year. I definitely want to continue buying less books, but I also do want to prioritize books as they come in. I think that's just a really good goal to have, because right when you get the book is when you're the most excited about it. At least that's true for me anyway. So I think I'm going to keep that as a goal for the second half of the year, and let's hope I achieve it. So the next goal actually was that I really did want a designated TBR shelf. And I went into this year knowing that I wanted to do some massive overhauls of my bookshelves. Specifically that I have a shelf upstairs that is stacked 2 and 3 deep. And I basically, in the end, wanted to get rid of that. And I think you will have seen by this point, part 1 of my unhaul of that shelf. I have since cleared it off. The majority of it, I think, did get unhauled. So I just feel like a weight has been lifted off of me. I feel silly when I say that I don't want that shelf anymore, but there's something about me that if it's not right in front of my eye line, I forget it exists. And so bookshelves that have that kind of back half where you can stack multiple books, that's not of value to me, even though it technically saves space. So I kind of feel silly saying that I want to get rid of that in order to get 2 or 3 new bookshelves that would just be kind of like this one shelf. Even this is a little bit wide for me. It is nice to sit little trinkets around, and it's nice to have a shelf that is a little bit more decorative, because once you put in little things like this here and there, you have kind of by design left some space for more books to come in. And so that's my goal with the bookshelves. I think this is a success, even though I don't have my bookshelves yet. I know that this is coming, and my goal is to really organize every book that I have by genre, whether I have read it or not. I do still want to keep things that are kind of classics collections. My goal is to keep them together because I just think it makes sense. So I doubt I'm going to separate them by whether I have read them or not. I don't know that that's conducive to me, but it is sometimes confusing. What would y'all do? Let me ask you this. Would you keep all of your Penguins, all of your Oxfords together, whether you had read them or not, or would you split them up? Or would you keep them together but kind of have 2 different stacks of them, some that you've read, some that you haven't? What is always the trouble for me with something like a TBR shelf, or just in general having a TBR physically, is that I always have more books that I haven't read than that I have. I've talked about this a lot. Because I'm somebody who unhauls, I'm not precious about keeping things, especially if I didn't necessarily love them. That means that I have so many more books on the TBR than books that I have read in my library. And so that's always been my fear about getting a designated TBR shelf is it really going to fit on one shelf? Is it? We'll see. That's definitely coming, and I think it should be coming shortly. Apparently, I also wanted to read more translated works. That was such a joy to me last year. Some of my favorite books of the year were works that were translated. This year, I don't know that I have read anything translated that wasn't those ancient classics. I'm really racking my brain. I would say certainly there is nothing contemporary that has been translated that I have read this year. So that is something that I think I should prioritize in the second half of the year. But since it is a goal that I didn't even attempt to meet here in the first 6 months, I don't know if I should keep it for the back half of the year. It's a shame because I really do think translated works were kind of what made up some of the bulk of my reading life last year, and they were such a joy to me. This year, I feel like my theme has been fantasy, which has also been great because I can't remember the last time I was truly in love with fantasy the way that I am right now. And so each year does seem to have a theme for me, especially having been on Booktube when I can really look back and see favorite books and things like that. I feel like each year has a different theme, and apparently this year's theme is not translated contemporary fiction, but we will find some. July is K-Tropathon, and so I did want to read a couple of books that were translated from Korean, and so maybe that will kind of get me back in the headspace. We'll see. Going hand in hand with that, I apparently just in general wanted to step outside of my comfort zone more. I don't really know what that means because I would say now I don't even necessarily have a comfort zone. I would say I don't feel like I read one genre more than any other. I think historically I have always read the majority fantasy, but I don't necessarily feel that way anymore. I think this has been a fantasy year for me, but I now no longer feel like there are genres that I won't read, if that makes sense. When I came onto BookTube, I really didn't foresee myself ever reading something that was a mystery or a thriller, or even ever going into the territory of literary fiction. And I feel like in the past couple of years, I have really experimented with those genres and I've become comfortable with them. Of course, not everything you read from every genre is good, but that's true of even your favorite genres like historical fiction and fantasy for me. Some of them are just not bangers. I would say this was probably the wrong way to phrase it. I do feel like last year I stepped out of my comfort zone in terms of the times of publication of books. I think I went for more modern classics last year, which is interesting because it is a time period that I never thought I would take to. But now I would say I read so omnivorously that I don't necessarily even know what I would consider my comfort zone. There are some things that are just your bread and butter no matter what. I feel like I love dark academia. I feel like I love fae books. I feel like I love classic historical fiction, but I would not say those make up the majority of my reading life, if that makes sense. So I'm kind of confused by this goal in general, but it is definitely always good, I think, to step outside of your comfort zone to read something that you think you might not like. So I also wanted to read more from favorite authors. I don't think that's happened for me. I really, truly don't. I set this goal basically because I'll find an author and I'll say, wow, I love them and I love their vibe. And then I'll read maybe one or two of their works, but I never carry on with them. I don't blow through an author's backlist the way that I know a lot of people do. And I think that's interesting, and I would like to do that more. I would like to read more from my favorite authors. I'm just someone, it's really hard for me to do this. I'm just someone who doesn't like to stick in the same world for too long. I don't like to read the same author for too long. And so I think that leads to me not finishing series, A, but B, it leads to me not wanting to read the same author over and over again. And so I never complete an author's backlist. And I think I set this goal in mind specifically with Stephanie Garber and Herman Hesse, who were my two most read authors last year. Have not read a single book from either one of them this year. I think that's a great goal. I think that's a really positive goal because I think if you're reading from authors that you already like, the chances are high that you're going to rate something else by them highly. So I think that would make for a really positive reading year. I think that would be a great goal to have. So maybe I'll fold this one over. My Goodreads goal was 50 books and I have hit it. I hit it this week. We are halfway through the year. I've read 50 books. I don't know who I am, but I'm proud of her. What is so interesting about this is that in 2021, I think I read more than I ever had before, but I felt like I didn't have that memorable a reading year. And then last year, I didn't read as much, but I felt like I had a more positive all-around reading year. This year, I think this is my best reading year of all time, and I am reading more than I was in 2021. And so I was always thinking last year, clearly the numbers don't mean anything. When you're reading a lot of books, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're reading all great ones, but I think this year I have just been on it. And I think maybe now I know my taste a little bit better, and so I can kind of see where things have buzzwords that I am attracted to. And so I think in general, I have just been picking up books that I really, really enjoy. I am not going to up my Goodreads goal at all. I think that would be kind of anxiety inducing, but I'll be interested to see how I finish out the year. I do think the second half of the year is just not as strong reading wise because there's just so much going on. Even this month, I've had so much going on, even though I've read more in June than I have in previous months this year. I still had so much going on, and I feel like the second half of the year is going to be like that too. So I don't know that 50 more books is achievable. Otherwise, I would say maybe we'll get to 100 books this year. Maybe. I also wanted to DNF more. I don't necessarily think I have done that, but I don't think I've picked many books this year that I really wanted to DNF. Those that I have DNF'd, I feel like I was either in a reading slump or I really truly knew that I did not feel the book at all, and so I just moved on with my life. And that was kind of my goal, was just to go on and DNF and say, if I never come back to this, that's okay, and I don't mind it. That's, I think, what I feel guilty about, is that I often think, well, I didn't give the book enough of a chance. And that's how you get into a reading slump, I can tell you that. I have read many, many books that I should have DNF'd. I have finished them thinking that there was going to be something great at the end. It doesn't matter. If you're not feeling it halfway through, you're not going to be feeling it at the end. And I think that's a good way to get into a reading slump. So I still want to keep this as a goal in the last 6 months of the year. I feel like I've done pretty well on it, but I also just don't think I have picked many books this year that I was not enjoying enough to DNF it. I had an interesting question in my goals video this year that was about wrap-ups and whether I should continue on with them. All of y'all said to keep the wrap-ups, and now I feel like it's flip-flopped. I want to keep the wrap-ups basically for me, but I've noticed in the analytics, they don't perform near as well as they used to. So I think it's interesting that in 6 months, this is kind of flip-flopped a bit, because I felt like subscribers were more interested in a wrap-up than I was at the beginning of the year, just because I feel like I talk about books in multiple different places. And me, I don't watch most booktubers wrap-ups, because if I watch them blog, I've seen them talk about the book, and that's more interesting to me than the final review. But as with everything on Booktube, I recognize people don't consume content the same way that I do. And it appeared to me at the end of last year that the wrap-ups were still of value to a lot of people because they did really well in the analytics. This year they haven't, but I still like them. And in fact, I think they're really valuable. Even if they're just for me, they're really valuable as kind of like my reading journal, so to speak, so that I know when I read something and how I felt about it at that time. I'm still going to keep them because I enjoy doing them. I enjoy filming them. And it's not that they do badly, they just perform slowly, I think. And that may be that everyone and their brother is uploading a wrap-up at the same time every month, and so you pick and choose who you're going to watch. But I still think they're of value, so I'm going to keep them. So my other big goal was to put everything into one journal, one book. And I specifically wanted to start tracking Booktube things. And by that, I really wanted to track like my subscriber count. I still do that. I track that every week. I also wanted to track whether I was reading every day. That is not helpful to me at all. In fact, I think that's a little bit anxiety inducing. I started the year off with a Hobonichi, and that has kind of a daily page for every day of the year. And I have always felt like that's a value to me. That's typically how I have enjoyed planners in the past. I just really wanted to marry Booktube and day job and everyday life. I wanted everything to be in one planner, one journal. That just hasn't been working that well for me. And one thing that really bothered me about it was kind of the habit tracker section, which you don't have to use. I want to go on and say you don't have to track anything. But I did, and one of the things that I really wanted to track was if I was reading every day, because I noticed last year that I think weeks went by where I didn't read anything. That is still true for me this year. When I look at when I did track it, days would go by, and then I would try to like read a couple of pages at night so that I could scribble in that little circle and say that I read today. That's not really what I wanted to track. I think I wanted to track substantial reading, like when you've read 50 pages at least. Not the 2 or 3 pages that you read before bed and then you're like, I can't do this anymore, I've got to go to sleep. That's what I wound up tracking. And so I don't even feel like the tracker was that accurate to me. But I felt pressure by having that. I felt pressure to read every day. That's not necessarily negative, because last year I felt like I didn't read enough and I wanted to read more. But this year I feel like I've hit a good balance. It's still true that during the week, like on weekdays, I'm not reading. It's just not happening. But then sometimes when I looked at when I was tracking, the weekend also wound up being times that I didn't really read. And so I'm kind of constantly wondering, how did I even finish a book? Honestly, I'm wondering where that time was. But I have moved away entirely from the Hobonichi. I am now using one of my Season's Greetings planners, which has kind of this setup that has an upper setup that's very blank, and then the week. So each one of these little cubes is a day. I love this. I have been using this for a month now. I think it is really fantastic. I think it's great because I can track over here. I'm tracking currently reading. This is what I'm listening to. This is what I'm watching. That's just fun stuff that I like to track. But I think it's been great to have these little highlighted sections to make note of when I normally post a video. So I'm still keeping track of the same things that I was tracking in my Hobonichi. But I feel like it's less stressful to me, because I often felt too with the Hobonichi, because it has a full day's spread, when days went by that I didn't have anything to add to that or to journal about, or when I wasn't at work and I wasn't using it truly as a planner, I felt like I wasted those pages. So in general, this has just worked a whole lot better for me. And so I'm going to keep this throughout the rest of the year. I want to make a big decision about the planner early on. I feel like I decided on the Hobonichi very last minute last year. And I know a lot of the planner girlies have it in mind right now, what they're going to do next year. And I feel like I need to be more of a planner in terms of planners, if that makes any sense. In terms of new goals that I want to set for the second half of the year, they are very minimal, but I think they are achievable. The bookshelf organization is the big one. I'm basically putting this here because I feel like it's a goal that will be achieved. I am already in the process of organizing the books. I have unhauled a lot. I feel very good about the place that I'm at currently. I just need to decide now on what shelves I'm gonna get. I am so excited. I am really excited to finally feel like an official booktuber, and I won't just have this baby. I will be in front of like a wall of books like everyone else, and that's what I've always wanted. I feel like that will be achieved soon, and probably by the end of the summer, if not by the end of July. This is my big one, and I think this will sound kind of odd, but I feel like this is needed for me. I am not gonna do any readathons in the second half of the year. I said it last year that I told myself I wasn't going to do any in 2023 at all. And now I know I'm halfway through the year. I'm just not doing anything for the rest of the year. Excluding Booktober. I mean, I have to participate in Booktober. I'm sorry. I was gonna say that I wasn't even going to do that, but I am definitely going to do Booktober. Who am I? But I feel like the reason that I want to set this goal is that I never listened to a TBR when I said it. And I mean this truly in terms of my own readathons. This month was Ancients-a-thon. I don't know that I read a single thing on my TBR because I wasn't in the mood to read classics, and I haven't been all year. And so I feel like if I can't make myself A, stick to a TBR, and B, that I'm not in the mood for whatever the readathon is, I am not going to force myself to do that stuff anymore. I feel like I did that a lot in 2021, and I feel like it led me to be burned out. Really, it did, in terms of Booktube and in terms of reading. I also feel like it's false advertising on my part that I put up a TBR and I tell y'all that I'm going to be reading this stuff that I then don't read. And so that's why you've not seen anything for me in terms of a TBR for like K-Tropathon or Jane Austen July. I don't know what I want to read in July, and I feel like I want to keep it open. I think that's going to be the best for me in the second half of the year. We will see how that goes, and then I will make an executive decision about 2024 at the end of the year. But I feel a lot of pressure in terms of readathons, and they're wonderful events. They are such great components of the community of Booktube. It's a great way to get to know people. but I feel like I have been a poor participant in readathons for the past couple of years. In fact, the only readathon that I ever read anything on my TBR or that I ever stick to the entire month is Booktuber. So I feel like this is a necessary goal. It's not even just something that I want to set. I think it's something that I just need to go on and commit to, because it's clear that I have been doing that anyway, even though I have been saying that I am participating in readathons. I don't know that I have ever read a single thing on any of my TBRs this year. March of the Mammoths was a failure for me. Feb Regency was a failure for me. And now Ancients-a-thon is. And so I don't want the second half of the year to feel like that to me. I also want to do better vlogs. I want to vlog more, but I want my vlogs to be better at the same time. Vlogs are my favorite type of content to watch on Booktube. I know they aren't everyone's, but I really enjoy them. And I think what's big right now on Booktube, and something that I've also just always enjoyed, is truly a themed reading vlog or a challenge reading vlog. And I have never done much of them because, going back to what I said about readathons, I can't stick to a TBR, even if it's one I set, even if it's just for the week. I really struggle with it. But I want to challenge myself to do more stuff like that in the second half of the year and do longer form vlogs. That's what I prefer to watch. And I used to do a lot of longer form content, but I also noticed in the analytics that people didn't watch the video that long. And so I thought I should shorten things down. Let me know how you feel about the length of videos in the comments below. I love a long video. And if it's a really short video, I sometimes pass up on it because I want something that's going to keep my attention for a long time. So that's kind of what I want to do, is do more content that I enjoy watching. And so I feel very inspired right now to do a couple of themed vlogs. We will see how it goes. Once again, I am a mood reader, and so it feels a little bit like you're kind of caging me in when you give me a TBR or tell me that I have to read anything. And I say that when I'm putting the parameters on it myself. So you just never know with me. But I feel like that's a good goal, and I think it's achievable. I have something written down here that's just changing reading taste, and I don't know how to express why I want this to be a goal. I guess my goal with my changing reading tastes is just to accept it. Because I have noticed over the past year especially, I have moved away from things that were big components of my reading life earlier on in Booktube. I'm just not as big into classics. I'm not as big into historical fiction as I used to be. It's not to say that that won't come back or that I've stopped reading those things, but I think I have forced myself to read things in terms of making it a variety of books that I have read every month. And that is not conducive to me having a good time on Booktube. And for me, Booktube has got to remain fun for me to enjoy it. And it's also got to remain fresh and new. And I feel like it has remained fresh and new for me because my reading tastes have changed so much over the 5 years that I have been on Booktube. So I guess I just don't want to fight it anymore. I don't want to force myself to do a variety of things if I'm not feeling it. Other creators don't. I watch a lot of creators who go through massive reading changes, and I love that for them. So I guess I'm just wanting to accept that about myself. I am not the person that I was in 2020, that's for sure, or 2021. A lot has changed for me personally. And thus, I think it's natural that my reading has also changed in the time since then. So I am just not going to fight that anymore. Last but not least, it is going to be my 5-year Booktube anniversary in August. I want to do something for that. I am going to do, I think, kind of a reflection video on that, and possibly kind of a Booktube style Q&A with it, where I just kind of talk about behind the scenes of the channel. I think that's what I'm going to do in honor of it. I don't actually know the date that I uploaded my first video, but thank goodness you can't find it, because Lord knows I was terrible on camera in 2018. But that's coming up for me. I just really want to celebrate that. I feel like that's a massive milestone, half a decade, and so I want to do something special for that. But those are all of the goals for the second half of the year. I feel pretty good about the goals that I set for the first 6 months, even though I haven't read many ancient classics. That's okay. It seems like every year I set some goals that I never meet, and it was bound to happen that there was one that I just really didn't achieve, and I feel like that was the one. But I would love to know down below if you have made any goals this year, if you kept to them, and if you are making goals for the second half of the year. But that's going to be all for me today. I hope you're all having a great week. Happy reading. Goodbye.